John Rambo. Juanito Rambo.
Production has officially kicked off on what many people are now calling Rambo VI, and the project is moving ahead with a fresh angle on the legendary soldier's story. Even though earlier reports described the film as an origin-style chapter, the way it's being positioned now makes it feel more like the next big installment in the saga rather than just a side story. Filming has started overseas, the cast list has expanded, and the creative team sounds very committed to digging into the character's past in a way that still feels intense and cinematic. Because of that, this new chapter is shaping up to be both a continuation in spirit and a deep dive into how the hardened warrior we know was first shaped by war. The movie centers on a younger version of the iconic fighter, with Noah Centineo stepping into the lead role that made Sylvester Stallone famous decades ago. The story tracks his early combat experience during the Vietnam War, showing the brutal conditions and personal trauma that later define his behavior and outlook. It's being directed by Jalmari Helander, who previously made a gritty wartime revenge thriller that many action fans praised for its raw energy. The screenplay comes from a writing duo who already worked on a major comic book action film, so the script is expected to balance character focus with large-scale action. Because filming is already underway in Thailand, it looks like the production is moving forward at full speed rather than staying stuck in development. Along with the lead casting, several additional actors have joined the movie, which suggests the story will include a wider circle of soldiers, allies, and enemies around the main character. That matters because a war story works best when the hero isn't operating in a vacuum, even though he often ends up isolated. A bunch of new supporting roles usually means more squad dynamics, command structures, and personal relationships that can raise the emotional stakes. War films hit harder when losses and loyalties feel personal, so expanding the cast could help the film avoid feeling too narrow or repetitive. The director has spoken openly about how important this franchise was to him growing up because he saw the original film at a young age and said it had a major influence on why he wanted to become a filmmaker in the first place. That kind of personal connection can be a good sign, because it often leads to a more respectful and focused approach instead of a purely commercial one. He described this new installment as stripped down and grounded, focusing on survival, endurance, and the loss of innocence that comes with prolonged combat. That suggests the tone may lean more toward the seriousness of the earliest film rather than the explosive spectacle of some later sequels. Even though audiences expect action, the emphasis sounds like it will stay on character and consequence. The franchise itself has had a long run, stretching across multiple decades and several films, with the first story introducing a troubled veteran pushed into conflict on American soil. Later entries increased the scale, sending the hero into international war zones and rescue missions, because the character became known for one-man army scenarios and high-impact action. Over time, the series earned hundreds of millions at the box office, so it makes sense that studios aren't ready to let it rest. But continuing such a well-known story is tricky, especially when the original star has largely stepped away from the role. Passing the torch is never simple, even though it can work when handled carefully. Some viewers are cautious about the casting choice for the younger lead because the original performance had a very specific kind of physical presence and quiet intensity. Replacing that isn't just about muscles or training, it's about screen gravity. The newer actor has shown he can handle action roles and military-style material, so the physical side may not be the problem. The bigger question is whether he can project the same wounded, dangerous stillness that defined the character before. Even though skepticism is understandable, strong direction and a focused script can sometimes pull out a performance people didn't expect. That's where the director's track record becomes important. His previous war-set action film followed a near-unstoppable fighter battling overwhelming enemy forces across harsh terrain, and it didn't shy away from brutality or grit. It mixed stylized action with very physical danger because every fight felt costly and desperate. That tone lines up closely with what people want from a Rambo-style story. So although the casting debate will probably continue, the directing choice gives the project a solid creative backbone. A filmmaker who already understands lone warrior storytelling has a better chance of delivering something that feels true to the franchise's roots. There's also a broader creative opportunity here because telling an earlier chapter of a famous character's life lets the writers explore areas that older films only hinted at. We've known for a long time that the hero returned from war deeply scarred and unable to adjust, but we never fully saw the events that caused that damage. Showing those missions, moral conflicts, and battlefield losses could add weight to everything that comes later in the timeline. Even though we already know he survives because the later stories exist, survival isn't the only source of tension. Psychological damage, broken trust, and the loss of fellow soldiers can carry just as much dramatic power. Still, the timeline setup creates a built-in storytelling challenge. Because this is set before the earlier movies, the audience goes in knowing the main character cannot die or be permanently removed from the board. That removes one layer of suspense that many action films rely on. But tension doesn't disappear just because the hero lives. The film can still create uncertainty around who else survives, what goes wrong, and how badly events reshape him. Emotional outcomes can stay unpredictable even though the physical outcome for the lead is locked in. So the script needs to focus more on transformation than on basic survival stakes. Another smart way to handle that limitation is to lean more into character study alongside combat. A title approach that centers on the character's name signals a more personal lens because it suggests the story is about the man, not just the mission. Exploring his mindset, his relationships with fellow soldiers, and the moral lines he's forced to cross could keep the narrative gripping. The series has always worked best when it balances action with commentary on trauma and abandonment because that deeper layer is what made the very first story stand out. Spectacle alone isn't enough, although the action still needs to deliver. Even though this chapter goes backward in the timeline, it still has to feel meaningful within the larger saga. That means planting emotional or thematic threads that connect clearly to the later events audiences already know. Small character habits, fears, or loyalties formed here can echo forward into the rest of the series. Because of that, careful writing matters more than surprise twists. Viewers aren't coming for shock value, they're coming to understand how the legend was built under pressure. There's also the question of tone balance. Some of the later entries in the franchise leaned heavily into explosive action and high body counts, which pleased part of the audience but pushed the stories closer to pure spectacle. A war origin chapter has room to rebalance that approach because early experiences tend to feel more grounded and chaotic rather than heroic and polished. Mud, confusion, and moral gray zones can replace clean victories. That shift could refresh the series, even though it's still connected to the same character and brand. So Rambo 6, as it's now being framed, carries both risk and opportunity. It risks comparison to an iconic performance and to a beloved original film, because those shadows are impossible to avoid. But it also has the chance to deliver the most character-driven entry in years, if it commits to grit, psychology, and consequence. With a war-focused director, an expanded cast, and a story centered on formative trauma, the ingredients are there for something that feels purposeful instead of repetitive. Even though expectations are mixed, the project has enough strong elements that it could surprise people if everything comes together the right way. And that's that for today's video, folks. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in our next video.